Well, welcome everybody. It's another Wednesday evening. This is our third in a series of 6. Is everybody doing well with their new diets? Yeah? How many people are actually doing it or trying it? Wow, fantastic. Excellent. That's great. Anybody taking any plane rides yet? Asked for vegan food? You know what? When you go on a plane, it's great because the airlines have it all figured out now. In fact, if you ask them for a special meal, they say vegetarian. They say, you know, which kind. So they got it all right. It's like 20 years ago. Forget it. But then what happens is your food comes first, and then you're sitting there eating this great meal while everyone else. It's kind of embarrassing, actually. And they're looking at it and thinking, wow, that's better than. And then theirs comes, and they say, wow, how'd you get that? That was better than what I got. So even if you're not vegan, you probably should order the vegan meal. OK, there was something I wanted to do. OK, I'm recording this. And good. OK. Make sure I get it all right. So here's our schedule again. We're probably going to run. Probably the first half is going to go a little over, and the second half is going to be shorter. We're not going to cram as much in tonight. We're going to have more time for question and answers. So I know it gets a little hectic sometimes, and I talk fast, especially after a day of work. So this is supposed to wake you up, I think. Is it going to work? Okay. Oh, see, that was shortened. Okay, so this is Michael Greger. How many people have gone to his website, the nutritionfacts.org? Isn't that great? He is the one who makes a new video every day. Oh, wow. Yeah, and I think should we leave that light on? Do people want the lights on better? Yeah. All right, I guess you can see pretty well. Good. So I just wanted to show you a little video about Michael, because he's a pretty fascinating guy. So let's see if this works.
I think the spark for many kids to want to become a doctor when they grow up is seeing a grandparent get sick or even die. But for me, it was my grandma getting better. Back in the 70s, she went to Pritikin Center, early lifestyle medicine pioneer. They wheeled her in, and she walked out. I'll never forget that. Healthy diets can prevent, successfully treat, and in many cases even reverse many of the chronic diseases that are killing people today. The food and beverage industry spends billions of dollars every year contributing to the public's confusion about basic accepted principles of nutrition. Dr. Dean Ornish proved you cannot just slow down heart disease, our #1 killer, not just stop it in its tracks, but actually reverse heart disease, open up clogged arteries without drugs, without surgery. It's like the miracle of modern medicine, yet hardly anyone knows about it. The goal is to get this potentially life-saving information to the greatest number of hands possible, and that's how nutritionfacts.org was born. There are 6,000 or 7,000 new articles published on nutrition in scientific journals every year. And what we've needed is someone to sift through all that, pick out the most groundbreaking, interesting, practical findings, translate it into some user-friendly form, and then get it out to the public. People need to know. Diet and lifestyle changes can reverse our #1 killer. This lack of awareness results in millions upon millions of totally unnecessary deaths. There are accepted basic nutrition principles that haven't changed in decades, yet people still aren't aware of the power of nutrition to improve their lives.
What, 10 or 15 years younger than I am, but.
In one of my videos last year, I noted that the fish oil distillation process was found ineffective at removing all the industrial contaminants from fish oil, so even quote-unquote PCB-free fish oil may be anything but. Isn't there a law in California, though, that makes it illegal to sell toxic substances that cause cancer or birth defects without at least a warning label? I've never seen such a label on fish oil, and neither did the Environmental Justice Foundation, and so they sued CVS, GNC, Rite Aid, along with the major fish oil manufacturers. To do so, of course, they had to prove the fish oil you find in stores actually contains PCBs, so they went out and grabbed 10 and tested them. Some had 70 times the PCBs of others, and 240 times the toxicity. This is why we should get our long-chain omega-3s without any risk of toxins by choosing microalgae or yeast-based EPA-DHA supplements. Nutritionally equivalent, a safe and convenient source without the toxic waste.
So what about problems with fish? Because everyone keeps hearing, well, you got to eat fish, right? Fish isn't bad. It's good for you. Well, let's talk about fish oil for one thing, because that's one of those foods that gets fractionated and puts in little capsules, right? And well, for one thing, it's unstable. That's why it has to be refrigerated and comes in a little capsule that's dark. And it breaks, when it breaks down, it gives up free radicals when it decomposes, and there's no antioxidants in fish oil, right? Unlike when you get your omega-3s from green leafies, you're going to get antioxidants along with it, which help counteract the free radicals. As Michael says, it's often contaminated with PCBs and mercury. What about algal oil? Well, that's taken directly from the algae, which is where the fish get it to begin with anyway, right? It's not like the fish actually make omega-3 fatty acids. It's nutritionally equivalent. You saw the article he had up there. It's been demonstrated to be exactly the same and without the contaminants. What about other sources of omega-3s? Well, they're found in more stable forms in vegetables, fruits, and legumes. Guess what? Just like everything else in this class, right? And they also, when you get them that way, you get the antioxidants to neutralize any free radicals that are produced. So what about fish fat? Well, most of the fat in fish is not omega-3 fatty acids. It's 15 to 30% of it is saturated fat anyway, which is the undesirable fat, and it contains cholesterol. And as we said, fish is often contaminated with mercury and PCBs. Does anybody know where most of the mercury comes from in fish? Why do fish have mercury in them? It's all these coal-fired power plants all over the planet, and it just rains down coal dust that's got mercury in it, and it gets concentrated and it moves up the food chain. And the fish that we eat are often at the top of the food chain, so they have a lot of mercury. We'll talk about that some more. And there are often recommendations to limit fish intake, especially for pregnant women. So first you're told you got to eat a lot of fish for your brain health, right? But don't eat too much because of the mercury. Talked about that. And then it turns out that omega-3s ingested that way may not be beneficial after all. And I have an article here you might find interesting. This is from the BMJ, the British Medical Journal. They looked at the risks and benefits of omega-3 fats for mortality, cardiovascular disease, and cancer. Systemic review. So they reviewed a lot of studies, and this was ingested omega-3s, and they couldn't demonstrate any clear effect on total mortality, combined cardiovascular events, or cancer. So in other words, if you actually look at big studies, you can't really prove that it helps anyway. And we're talking about this. This is not using it as a drug. This is using it as kind of a sort of a preventive population-based therapy, and it's not demonstrating that it works on that level. Also from the Journal of the American Medical Association, same conclusion. Overall, the omega-3 PUFA supplementation was not associated with a lower risk of all-cause mortality, cardiac death, sudden death, myocardial infarction, or stroke based on relative and absolute measures of association. So in other words, we can't really even prove that the stuff helps, which is why when we tell you about taking the omega-3 capsules, we're kind of iffy about it. You know, if your doctor says you need to take fish oil and you really want to do that, well, we think there's something better, but we're not really sure that that's really how you should be getting your omega-3s. I mean, it's obviously something that comes in a capsule is not something you're likely to have evolved eating. And green leafies have lots of them, or have plenty of omega-3s. So what about industrial fishing? I think I might have shown this before, or not. This shows what happens when modern fishing nets are just dragged along the bottom. And there's a piece of coral that's bigger than those two fishermen. It's 500 years old. And it's going to take 500 years to grow back. And it's not going to grow back because this has become the typical way that we fish now. We drag these huge nets along the bottom, and just basically it's like clear cutting a forest, only we're clear cutting the bottom. It turns out, you know, you're thinking about clear cutting forests, there's think about 150 times that amount. That's how much the bottom of the ocean is getting clear cut every year. There's the coral. And what about this? Well, I think I know I showed you this before, so I won't go into it again. But this is even Fox News gets it, right? You know, tuna is full of mercury because it's a upper level predator fish, right? And so it's concentrating all the mercury that's in all the little fish that it's eating. And so this is just from a report from USA Today. I won't go into all the details here, but because I know I showed you this. But just remember what the industry is going to say. Representatives from the tuna industry disagreed, maintaining that canned tuna is perfectly safe to eat. In fact, they say the real health problem is that people do not eat enough seafood. You know, I'm someone who grew up eating seafood. And I grew up in Long Island Sound. I could catch fish and clam and go crabbing. And I thought it was great when I was a kid. And you know, I still like the way it tastes, but I can't really recommend it. In fact, when I became a vegan, I promised, this was 22 years ago, I promised, oh, you like that? He has a great sense of humor. I promised myself I would eat lobster 4 times a year. This was 22 years ago, and I think I had it twice afterwards. And that's the only thing I ever missed is lobster. These are some slides I borrowed from Colin Campbell's course. By the way, you should congratulate me. I just completed taking Colin Campbell's course online. It's 30 credit hours, and it's one of the hardest CME courses I've ever taken. So, because you have to like type in all this, you get into these chats and you have to correspond with your fellow students and your teacher, but it takes 6 weeks. It was really good though. So I borrowed a couple of these slides from them. This is just to kind of talk about how unsustainable fishing is anyway. Even if we were to recommend, even if we thought fish was really good for you and you could recommend it for health, there's just no way we're ever going to be able to supply fish to everybody on the planet. We can't even barely supply, you know, wealthy Westerners at this point. So I'm going to talk about, there's 2 main problems with fishing. One is industrial-based farming on the land, and the other is the industrial fishing practices in the marine environment. And they're both affecting fish. And I'm going to show that to you in a minute, but let's just start with a couple of definitions. So eutrophication, it's when you add all this nutrient material to a body of water, and then it grows algae. And the algae dies, it settles to the bottom, and then bacteria start working on the algae. And as they digest it, they consume all the oxygen in the water. And you end up with what's called a dead zone. And there's a huge dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico now where the Mississippi runs out. I'm going to show you a map of that in a minute. So the basic problem is nutrient runoff from agriculture. And a significant fraction of nutrient fertilizer that is applied to the land eventually makes its way to stream, lakes, and the coastal ocean. And this increases nutrient loads in coastal regions, stimulates exceptional algal growth in surface waters. And then there you have these big blooms. And then, like I said, the algae sinks to the bottom. And you've got all these now bacteria doing what's basically anaerobic respiration. They're digesting it down there. And all the oxygen basically is gone at that point. And fish can't live there because now you don't have enough oxygen for the fish to live in. That's the upshot here, is that you just don't have any oxygen for the fish in that water anymore. And this is just to kind of graphically show you, these are modern farming practices. You scrape the land and then you inject fertilizer into it, and then a lot of it runs off. And this was one of the more depressing talks that I had to watch for this course. But it's true that population of the planet has increased by 50% since 1980. That's pretty amazing, isn't it? And all those people need food, and we're feeding them, trying to feed them all like Americans by growing corn and grain so we can feed the cattle, right? So that they can all have meat. Well, you know it's not going to last. It just can't. It's not going to work. This just goes to show you one of the, well, I think the one on the left is probably spreading pesticides, although I think you can spread fertilizer that way as well. So this is the graphic I wanted to show you. Basically, the Gulf of Mexico is like the sewer for the entire central third of the nation. So all those river basins, the Missouri, the Ohio, the upper Mississippi, they all drain into the Mississippi, which then flows into the Gulf of Mexico. And that little brown area there is the hypoxic zone. And fish basically just can't live there. And those areas are getting bigger and bigger. And this is a map that just shows what it's like around the world now, where the population centers are. Those little dark circles, those represent areas where they have hypoxic zones in the offshore waters. This just goes to show you how big these industrial fishing vessels have gotten. They have these huge spreaders that drag these nets along. And these nets are not discriminating, right? They're not just getting the prey fish. They're getting everything. So these are sharks, and mixed in with the fish that they weren't the target. As much as 70% of sea life that is scraped up by the trawlers is not usable. So they throw it back in. So basically they scrape the bottom, take out what they want, and then throw the rest back in. And like I said, it's about 150 times greater than the global area of forest that's clear cut every year. There's a before and after shot, just basically showing a bunch of fish living on the bottom, and over there after it's been scraped, there's just not much left. Because it takes the coral and everything else along the bottom. About 180,000 birds die on fish hooks every year. These are these huge long lines that get dragged behind fishing boats that are out of sight and out of mind, right? But they may have up to 100 miles of line behind them, dragging a hook every 100 feet. And these poor seabirds grab a hold of the hook, and they get dragged under. Stellar sea lions, they dropped 82% from 1960 to 1989. This is off the coast of Alaska. What about fish farming? Well, right about now, about a quarter of all fish consumed is farmed. And that's an example of what a fish farm looks like. Basically, you have these fish living in those netted areas, and then they dump food into them. And the food is often grains that's basically from factory farming, which is why the omega-3 fatty acids in fish from the fish farmed actually may not be so great anyway, because they're not eating algae, right? They're basically cows, and so they're full of these, they're not even getting the omega-3s. They have a fatty acid profile that's very similar to a cow that's being fed on grain. This is just a close-up of what it looks like in one of those fish farm nets. And this is one of these really huge ones that's just basically a factory parked off the coast. And it sounds great, farmed fish, right? How sustainable is that? But it turns out, remember I showed you the bycatch, all the 70% of the stuff that they caught that they didn't want? Some of that gets ground up and dumped into these pens for the fish that are living in there. And these fish are living right on top of each other. So here's an example of eutrophication from fish farming. Basically, you get these huge growths of plant material, and it just chokes the whole waterway. So should we really recommend fish when it's unsustainable? It's not possible for everyone to consume it, even now. It's contaminated. And other creatures need the fish way more than we do. There are these huge, like those stellar sea lions. That's just a small example. The blue-footed boobies in the Galapagos, for example, they're running out of sardines. They're not reproducing right now. So in fact, I know sardines are becoming popular right now because they're low on the food chain. So they tend to have less environmental contaminant. So people are recommending, if you're going to eat fish, eat sardines to get your omega-3s. Just get your omega-3s from kale. So now I've depressed you about fish. Yes, question.
With the omega-3 supplements, if
Yes.
you look at the labels, they often say, well, this product has been tested by these labs and is shown to be free of these contaminants.
Right.
So are you saying that those claims are really in question?
I'll repeat the question. So he's asking if the omega-3 supplements that we were taking that claim to be contaminant-free because they've been tested, is that really accurate? I honestly don't know the answer to that. I know that when Michael, in his little video there, talked about how they did test all these omega-3 supplements, right?
10 of them.
10 of them. Yeah, well, all 10 were contaminated. So, yeah, can there be ones that aren't contaminated? I suppose. I mean, you'd have to take it on a case-by-case basis. The problem is the way the supplement industry is regulated. The FDA doesn't really regulate supplements. It only regulates supplements if they get into trouble. It can't. It's not like because of there's all these exemptions from lobbyists for the supplement industry. And I don't know if I understand this completely, but pharmaceutical companies, their drugs are constantly being tested, and they have to be pure. But supplements really only get kind of tested when they get in trouble. So I don't know what it means when they say they're pure. I don't know what kind of rules they have to follow.
Aren't European supplements tested?
The question is, aren't European supplements tested? Maybe. I don't know. I actually don't really know. They're better than the American ones? Okay. So get European ones. Yeah. Yes.
I take krill oil.
You take krill oil.
One step up from algae,
Oh, so you're asking about krill oil, which is one step up from algae, because krill eats the algae, right? Because krill are the little tiny shrimp. Yeah, that's true. It's not as far up the food chain. Why not get the algae?
Well, because of Fukushima, that's why.
Oh, but so you're worried about the algae, but I don't think the algae. But the
One of the most dire things happening on
no, I agree with you. But the algae they use in those capsules, my understanding is they're grown indoors. They're just grown in labs.
I don't know. I'm getting North Atlantic kelp right now. That's what I'm
Okay.
using for my
All right. Well, we'll talk about that later in question and answer. So we're going to move on to eggs. So what is in a large egg? Because you hear, wow, eggs are such great food. It's perfect for you, right? Well, there's about 78 calories in one egg. What do you think? How much protein do you think is in an egg? 6 grams. Good. Yeah. It's 25 calories. It comes from protein. It's about the rest of it's from fat because there's really nothing else in an egg, right? How does that work? It should add up to 100. So percent calories from fat. And then there's quite a bit of cholesterol. Remember we talked about why it always says 300 milligrams of cholesterol whenever you go to any agency to find out what your limit on cholesterol is. It'll always say 300 because that way you can have at least one egg. There is some vitamin D, but not a lot of vitamin D. I mean, people say, well, eggs are a good source of vitamin D, but you need 600 to 2,000 international units of vitamin D anyway. So you're not really getting that much from. And if you go out in the sun, you'll get about 20,000 units, right? And it's got some iron. People say it's got iron, but not very much. 2 to 3% of your daily requirement. And there's no fiber, which we need. So it's high in cholesterol when it's consumed whole. So but if you throw away the yolk, then it's nothing but pure animal protein, which I'm going to continue to try to persuade you is not good for you. And like I said, there's no fiber. There's also risk of bacterial infection from salmonella, and we keep hearing about more and more of that. So what about where they grow these eggs? So this is a typical egg farm nowadays. That is factory farm. Those are factory farmed hens. This is not like an exceptional one. This is average. So these hens are packed into these little, what do they call them?
Cage.
Cages, thank you. They're little cages, like 6 of them, right? Yeah, they're not just, yeah, thank you. Okay, very good. They're cages. They're packed in these little, and when they lay an egg, it just falls through the grating and ends up on this conveyor belt. And these hens are all miserable. They have to get their beaks cut right at birth, otherwise they peck each other because they go crazy. And this is by comparison with dairy cows. They probably have it worse, but dairy cows have it pretty bad, and I have to convince you of that as well. And then what about these little chicks? So I just want to give you, I'm going to show a 2-minute video or 2.5-minute video. It's got a little bit upsetting. It's not horrible, but it's a little upsetting. So if you want to step out or just, it is horrible. But it's easy to close your eyes without seeing it. So you're warned.
The footage you're about to see was recorded with a hidden camera at Highline Hatchery in Iowa, the world's largest hatchery for egg-laying breed chicks. For 2 weeks, a Mercy for Animals investigator covertly documented the systemic cruelty chicks at this hatchery are subjected to. These workers, called sexers, roughly separate the male chicks from the females. These male chicks are worthless to the industry because they will not lay eggs and will not grow large or fast enough to be raised profitably for meat. These male chicks are killed by being dropped into a grinding machine while still alive. Such killing methods are standard within the industry. Nearly 150,000 male chicks meet their deaths this way each day at the facility. This machine uses a laser to remove part of the chick's beaks. Chicks are placed head first into this rotating machine. Birds' beaks are filled with nerve endings. This procedure can cause both acute and chronic pain. This industrial machine separates newly hatched chicks from their eggshells. Chicks are roughly dumped onto moving conveyor belts, which haul them off to be sorted, debeaked, and for the males, killed. Many chicks are injured and killed by the sorting machine. This chick fell through the sorting machine and was left to die in a heap of eggshells on the factory floor. Still alive, this chick fell through the sorting machine and was sent through a scalding wash cycle.
And so they just, you know, if they're stuck in there, they get washed out, and that's how come they're in there.
Workers roughly handle the animals with little regard for their welfare. These workers roughly sort the chicks, searching for sick, injured, and deformed birds. The cruelty you have witnessed is not isolated, but rather inherent and widespread within the entire industry. Please remember these chicks the next time you sit down to a meal. You can help end this needless cruelty by adopting a compassionate, vegan diet. For information on cooking without eggs, visit chooseveg.com.
Sorry about that, but that's, I think, really important to understand how the whole system works. There's no way they can supply eggs to Americans, you know, on the kind of scale that we supply eggs to without doing it that way. It's just, yes?
I'm vegan, but I'm weaning my husband off eggs. So anytime I go to Abundance and I buy these eggs that are like $5.50 a carton, and it says it's rated #1 by the New York Times as being treating the hens the best.
Right.
So I called there, you know, and I asked them, where do you get, and they really love their hens. They
Sure.
love them. And the guy was very forthcoming. I asked him, what about where you get your hatchlings from?
Right.
And the same place.
Yeah, that's right.
So
Yeah.
it's like, even if you're trying to
Right.
do it that way. You know,
People understand what she's saying.
chop them up.
Right.
Well, they chop them up, you know. It's,
So that what we just saw is that's actually where the laying hens are being raised. That's where they hatch. And those chicks are going to then go to one of these big factory farms where they're going to lay eggs. And even the ones that are organic or free range, they still get their chicks from the same type of place, at least at the place you're talking about. I mean, obviously, theoretically, you can do it without that. And, you know, people keep chickens in their backyards. And, I mean, it's actually kind of cool. I mean, chicken.
they order chicks.
That's what we just said. Yeah, when we order chicks, that's where they come from. So.
People save them, at least they adopt them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but
Right.
some people actually adopted them, so they just happen to be laying eggs.
Yeah, yeah. This is an article from American Journal of Epidemiology from 1996, and the point of this is just to talk about how the increased risk of fractures with protein consumption if it's from an animal. So protein was associated with an increased risk of forearm fracture for women who consume more than 95 grams per day compared to those who consume less than 68 grams per day. But it was true for animal protein, but not for vegetable protein. So again, there's something different about animal protein and vegetable protein, whatever that is, that doesn't seem to have these same kind of health risks. Article from New England Journal, 2006. This is from the Harvard School of Public Health. I keep showing you articles from there. This is kind of a vegan Atkins diet. Diets lower in carbohydrate and higher in protein and fat are not associated with increased risk of coronary heart disease in women, but that was really only true if they were vegetable sources. So if the vegetable sources of fat and protein are chosen, these diets may moderately reduce the risk of coronary artery disease, actually. So you know how I keep telling you how the percentage of calories from fat is 10 to 20%? The truth is, it's not really clear. If you have heart disease, the studies have shown that that's going to reverse your heart disease. If you don't have heart disease and you're on a vegan diet, you may be able to have higher percentage of fat in your diet. So again, it's really about the holism. You know, just look at the whole food plant-based system here. What about dairy? So why does milk give me gas and diarrhea? Because you are normal. So like I said, 75% of adults on the planet are lactose intolerant. And I'll explain that in more detail in a minute here. And you all recognize him, right? Let's see here. Got to push another button. So what's the last thing he said? Don't eat dairy. Just eat vegetables. So this was an article from the New York Times, and this was in 1998, because he's been actually dead for a while. What did he say? Dr. Spock, arguably the most influential pediatrician of all time, has left children and their parents with a surprising and rather demanding legacy. Advice that they stick to a vegetarian diet devoid of all dairy products after the age of 2. And before the age of 2, what dairy products are we talking about? Mother's milk, right? And even if you go to the American Academy of Pediatrics, you're not supposed to give babies cow's milk before 1. They acknowledge that, and that's because of the risk of what? Type 1 diabetes, right? Yeah. So in the 7th edition of his world-famous book, Baby and Child Care, that was published just a few weeks after he died at the age of 94, Dr. Spock recommends an approach to childhood nutrition that many experts, including his co-author, Dr. Stephen J. Parker, consider too extreme. So I guess he didn't agree with his co-author, but they managed to co-author the book anyway. So here's another article. I find this one really interesting. This is from the European Journal of Clinical Nutrition from 2007, comparing vegetarians and non-vegetarians and their risk of fracture. So I'm going to actually talk about this one in detail because it's kind of fun. So they looked at 5.2 years, 343 men and 1,500 women who had fractures. And compared with meat eaters, fracture incidence ratios in men and women combined, blah, blah, blah. So it was, for vegetarians, it was a little, for vegans, it was 1.3 times the risk. So in other words, vegans were having a higher fracture rate than everybody else. Now, fractures are not necessarily indicative of osteoporosis, right? It's funny when you do a population study and you look at, you're trying to figure out osteoporosis rates, you look at fractures. But there's lots of reasons you can break bones. You can fall off your bicycle, right? Or you can go hang gliding and break your arm like I did. Or skiing and break your other arm like I did. So those are not osteoporotic fractures, but I would count, right, into these statistics. So what I do is I looked at this article and said, well, exactly what kind of fractures did these people have? Because they actually had the raw data, which I thought was kind of fun. But and I'll show you that in a minute. But if you look at the what I've circled there, it turns out that the vegans who consume more calcium actually didn't have a higher fracture rate. As long as you're getting more than 525 milligrams of calcium a day, then they were just like everybody else in terms of fracture rates. So we tell people to get 1,200 milligrams of calcium. You really need 500. So I tell people 600 just to be on the safe side, which is very easy eating vegetables. So they concluded in this population, fracture risk was similar for meat eaters, fish eaters, and vegetarians. The higher fracture risk in the vegans appeared to be a consequence of their considerably lower mean calcium intake. But if you looked at the vegans who had a higher calcium intake, they didn't have that problem. So just make sure you're getting enough calcium, and it's not an issue. So when you think of an osteoporotic fracture, what do you think of? What kind of fracture? Hip, right? OK, I'm glad you said that. And then what's the other one? Like compression fracture in the spine. Right? Well, look at this. Look at the raw data here. Do you see how many hip fractures there are in the vegans? It's right over here. Actually, I got it on the next slide. I'll give you a hint. It's 0. So the vegans had no hip fractures, which to me is an indication of osteoporosis, right? They don't seem to have spinal compression fractures in there, which is to me the other thing to really look for. Because those are the fractures you get by not doing very much, right? You just stand up and something breaks. The vegans were like, it could have been they were falling off their bicycles or whatever. Because these are wrist, arm, leg fractures, that type of thing. So I'm not sure how much that means, except that they did conclude that as long as you got over 525 milligrams of calcium, you didn't have to worry. What about milk and ovarian cancer? I showed some of these last time, and these are different articles. This is from the International Journal of Cancer from 2004. Women who consumed 1 or more servings of skim or low-fat milk had a 32% higher risk of any ovarian cancer compared to women who consumed 3 or less servings per month. And controlling for fat intake did not change our findings. So in other words, it seemed to be related to the protein in dairy, which is all you're getting if you're drinking skim milk, right? Lancet, 1998. These are big journals. Again, this is from Brigham and Women's, Harvard. And this was regarding circulating concentrations of insulin-like growth factors. So you've probably heard of this IGF-1 that's found in dairy. And it's insulin-like growth factor. It's a growth factor that helps calves get big and also stimulates the growth of cancers. If you've seen Forks Over Knives, Colin Campbell talks about that, how he was able to turn cancer on and off by feeding his rats casein or not giving them casein, and then the cancers would stop growing. This is from Science in 1998. Plasma insulin-like growth factor in prostate cancer. It turns out that prostate cancer is strongly associated with dairy. Strong positive association was observed between IGF-1 levels and prostate cancer risk. Men in the highest quartile had a 4 times risk compared with men in the lowest quartile. So in other words, you can significantly change your risk of prostate cancer by how much dairy you consume. Yes?
Casein is different than the IGF-1?
Right. Yeah. Casein is the protein. IGF-1 is a hormone that's found in milk. And it's associated with it comes along with the protein. It's not in the fats. I don't think it's in the fat. It's not, no, because you get it with skim milk for sure. So it also, due to modern production methods, milk contains antibiotics, pesticides, and hormones, additional hormones. So milk is a natural delivery system for hormones. It's meant to deliver hormones to a calf. So not necessarily it's meant to be given to human infants or children or adults. But now there's more hormones in modern milk because of the bovine growth hormone that's given to cows. Although truthfully, it doesn't change things that much, which is why they don't have to label it, because there's already so much growth hormone normally in milk that you really can't necessarily tell the difference just because there's now added hormones. And of course, there's no nutrient in dairy that cannot be obtained from plant foods in a safer form and with the following associated desirable nutrients. Antioxidants, you're going to get from plants. All these phytochemicals you get from plants. Fiber, which you're not going to find in any animal product, right? What about other problems? Well, as I've already demonstrated, it's associated with reproductive cancers of the prostate. Testicular cancer is also associated with dairy, breast, ovarian, and it contains the IGF-1. Remember, that's the insulin-like growth factor. So these are things that may sound esoteric, but if you go on the websites and read about this stuff, you'll hear about it all the time. IGF-1 is a big one, and that's the insulin-like growth factor. And it promotes tumor growth. Again, there's no fiber, no iron in dairy, which may even lead to anemia. So people say, well, I became a vegan, a vegetarian. I became a vegetarian, and now I'm anemic and I feel weak. Well, if you're continuing to consume dairy, you're going to lose iron and not get any iron in. And of course, even the USDA says you shouldn't consume the fat in dairy. So most scientific studies show no health benefit to dairy consumption, unless, of course, they were paid for by the dairy industry. Many scientific studies show that dairy is harmful to health, associated with diabetes, cancer, and heart disease. We talked about lactose intolerance last time. I'll remind you again. 75% of adults on the planet are lactose intolerant. And that means they don't have lactase, right? That's how you digest lactose. It's the sugar in milk. And it's a disaccharide that you need to split into 2 sugars before you can absorb them. And most people after the age of 5 don't have lactase in their intestine anymore. And no vitamin D. It's added. So if people say, well, you got to have vitamin D, milk for vitamin D, well, it's not there until it gets added. It can cause anemia. It's associated with juvenile onset diabetes, which is type 1 diabetes. And of course, I feel that's what I was just saying. I feel weak on a vegetarian diet. That's because you're not getting any iron in your milk, and also you may be losing blood from your intestine because it can cause your gut to leak blood. What about people from different parts of the world and their percentage of lactose intolerance? Well, the people who have the highest rates of lactose intolerance are East Asians. It's 90 to 100%. People who have the lowest level of lactose intolerance are the British, 5 to 15%. So when you think about people living, northern Europeans, people who kind of have to live in northern climates to live on their cows all winter, they're going to be more likely to be able to tolerate milk because it was adaptive. And there are certain tribes in Africa that can digest lactose because they live with their cattle. So I think that's kind of interesting. This is this isn't in your notes, but if you watch the video on YouTube later, you can find this. And I'm just going to review a little bit. Remember I told you to pretend that osteoporosis was a disease of dairy or calcium deficiency, even though it's not. And just quickly, I'm going to remind you that the USDA website has this incredible bias where it doesn't even consider non-dairy food sources as food, right? Food sources of calcium, it's all dairy on the right. And if you kind of rejigger those numbers, you can come up with a table that shows that actually greens per calorie have more calcium than dairy by a lot. So if you missed my first talk, that's that table. Bok choy is the highest. Really, it's 8 milligrams of calcium per calorie. Whole milk is down only 2 milligrams of calcium per calorie. Yes? That chart, email me and I'll send it to you. That chart is actually not available anywhere except for from the. Yes?
When you're talking about, I can't really read it and get the
Sure.
word, when you're talking about, is it a cup of kale or whatever?
Right.
Is that referring to before kale is cooked or afterwards? Like if you saute.
That's cooked. That's
It's cooked.
yeah.
So I guess how much is a cup, is that half a cup of kale?
So half a cup of kale would give you 90 milligrams of calcium.
And that's cooked kale.
Cooked kale, right. So you're saying, well, I can't eat that much kale. Well, here's the point. If you're just eating a varied whole food plant-based diet, you don't have to think about calcium. I show you these so you can convince yourself and also win arguments, right? Because there is calcium in all kinds of plant food. Figs have calcium. All the greens have calcium. Beans have calcium. There's calcium everywhere. The places you're not going to get calcium are the junk food, right? If you're getting your calories from soda or potato chips, you might not get enough, theoretically. But if you're eating a whole food plant-based diet, you're going to get plenty of calcium. You're probably going to get close to, you could get 800 or so pretty easily. You only need 600 or 525 according to that last article. And I'm going to show you a table where people around the world get way less calcium and don't have osteoporosis. Why cook versus? You could be uncooked. I was just in the interest of full disclosure. That's how I took it off of the USDA website. I'm going to show you that later, but I'll tell you about it now. The USDA has a wonderful website which I think is back up. It was closed for the government shutdown for a while. If you type in any kind of food, you can find out all the nutrients that are in it. It's kind of fun to play the game. In fact, we're going to play the game a little bit later, just to see how much of various nutrients are in various different kinds of food. And I just wanted to show you that the USDA just can't get over dairy. It keeps calling lactose intolerance a deficiency. Well, it's not a deficiency. It's normal. But they think it's a deficiency. So here's another article, also from Harvard. Milk, dietary calcium, and bone fractures in women. This is from the American Journal of Public Health from 1997. So these facts have been known for a long time. So these data do not support the hypothesis that higher consumption of milk or other food sources of calcium by adult women protects against hip or forearm fractures. So how much calcium do we really need? Well, we probably only need 600 milligrams of calcium per day. Not the 1,000 to 1,300 milligrams that's recommended, which the dairy industry loves, because how else are you going to get all that calcium unless you're drinking milk, right? So here's a table from around the world. And it shows calcium intake as the x-axis, and the y-axis is hip fracture rates. And if you look over on the left-hand side where almost nobody has a fracture, South African blacks, they're getting 200 milligrams of calcium a day in their diet. And they don't have any hip fractures. They have very little osteoporosis. People are getting all the calcium over here, the 1,400, 1,200, that's Finland, New Zealand, Sweden, Norway. They're the ones with the fractures. And they're also the ones with the prostate cancer and the breast cancer. So it's pretty interesting. Well, you can always draw a straight line through any bunch of dots, right? But look at people from Papua New Guinea. They have no fractures. Yugoslavia, no. You say, well, those are Eastern, they're primitive cultures. We don't really know whether they have it. Well, Hong Kong and Singapore are on there, and we know darn well that people are accurately measuring what's going on with them. And they have very low calcium intakes and essentially no osteoporosis.
Well, also those countries that have low fractures looks like they have more sun exposure.
More sun exposure.
More vitamin D.
That could be. Let's see. Let's go back. Hong Kong, Singapore. I don't know. People in.
Ones up above.
Right. That's true. Yeah, that's interesting. Well, there's no question about it. Vitamin D is important. In fact, I think that's really the only thing that's important. Vitamin D and weight-bearing exercise. And making sure you're getting enough minerals that include magnesium and calcium. But you don't need to worry about getting huge amounts. In fact, I'm going to show you, I think I have later some slides, that actually calcium is not so good for you when you get too much. So, and we talked about how previously how much power the dairy industry has over the USDA recommendations. And remember the article I showed you in the Wall Street Journal about how in 2004 they got the recommendation up 50% for dairy, and that was just because of lobbying. And that was not for calcium, that was for potassium. They managed to persuade them on the calcium thing, or the potassium thing. The dairy industry funds many university agriculture departments, so there's another reason you have to be very careful. So Colin Campbell, who was at Cornell, he was always in trouble with his colleagues, right? Because they were getting their grants from various animal agriculture industries, and they didn't like what he was saying. And honestly, they didn't really believe what he was saying. Because they didn't want to, I guess. But so this is a little slide from PCRM, our heroes, right? Has anyone visited their website lately? PCRM, it's a great website. Really wonderful information. Oh, in fact, should I tell people? So Neil Barnard, who's the president of Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, sent me an email 2 days ago and said, would you like to be on the Dr. Oz show on Friday? Because they... And because he says, because they were thinking of having me come, and I'm going to be busy at a conference. So I emailed him back and said, I'm going to be at the same conference, so I'm sorry, I'm not going to do it. So I mean, it would have been kind of cool, I suppose, but who wants to go to New York City so you can spend 3 minutes on TV, right? So we're going to go over it one more time. These dairy cows lead miserable lives, and they're indoors most of the time. They're impregnated, artificially impregnated every year, because that's the only way they're going to keep producing milk, is they have to have a calf every year. Then the calves are sold for veal, and people say, well, you know, I could never have veal because that's a baby cow. But if you're drinking milk, you're basically participating in the veal industry. They have chronic mastitis. If you've seen these huge udders, they're dragging them around. They have to be on antibiotics frequently. They have a natural lifespan of 25 to 30 years, and they only last 4 or 5 years under those conditions before they get slaughtered. So, you know, if you're a vegetarian and you're thinking, well, I'm not really hurting the cow by taking her milk, in the modern system, you really are hurting the cow. Their production declines, and they become very physically weak. And then there's this huge amount of environmental degradation that goes along with the, all this manure they're producing, water pollution. A lot of energy is consumed, and on top of that, it makes us sick. So I think I have a couple more slides before the break. This is about vitamin K. So, and hip fractures. So what about, we only seem to worry about vitamin D and calcium, right? Turns out that the more vitamin K you get, the lower your hip fracture risk. And what's the best place to get it? Lettuce. So they looked at this, and women who ate the most lettuce had the fewest hip fractures. Because they were getting, well, we think it's because they're getting vitamin K, right? That would be the reductionist assumption, is that it must be the vitamin K in there. But it may just be the lettuce. In fact, Mitch Ehrenberg here, he's not here, but he's one of my heroes. He took our class before. He's a local internist. And he was telling me how his knees got better after he started doing Tai Chi. So I said to him, well, what about the Tai Chi do you think made you better? And he looked, because I was thinking he was going to say, oh, it strengthens, you know, your lateral, collateral, whatever. He says, it's the Tai Chi. And he had to say it to me again. It's the Tai Chi. So it's the whole thing. Sometimes you just can't fractionate out what it is that's helping you. You just have to take it for granted that it's the whole thing. So this is the fantasy. These cows are living out here in the middle of these beautiful green fields. But in fact, this is the reality. Just like the chickens, they're living in these factory farms. And here's what happens to their udders. These huge udders with mastitis. It's very sad.
A lot of that's from that recombinant growth hormone.
Right. So what she's saying is a lot of it has to do with the growth hormone. Yeah, because the growth hormone that they give them, even though not a huge amount of it gets in the milk, a lot of it gets in the cow. Right. So let me just. What it does is it makes them produce huge amounts of milk that they're not really meant to do. They produce like 120 pounds of milk a day, and I think in the wild it might be like 20 pounds of milk a day. I mean, it's way more than they're meant to. So that's why they get these huge udders. Why is that legal? Because you can do anything you want to a farmed animal. It's your property. You can do whatever you want. So osteoporosis is a complicated multifactorial disease. There's lots of risk factors, and the risk factors are age, right? We don't think about osteoporosis in 25-year-old women, right? Something happens after menopause that changes. It's not your diet that changed. Age, weight, actually being a little heavier is helpful. Race, it tends to be higher in white women. Physical activity, it's good to be active. It's good, especially weight-bearing exercise. Sun exposure and vitamin D is good, and so is vitamin K. Magnesium and calcium, which are found in large quantities in green leafy vegetables. Caffeine's not so great necessarily. It does cause you to wash out a little bit of calcium when you drink your coffee. Salt's not so great. So calcium is just one necessary nutrient, and the optimum level is debatable. We don't really know the optimal level. We think it's at least, probably around 600 milligrams, probably less. Because I showed you that graph that the women who were only going to need 200 a day were doing okay. And it's not a matter of dairy consumption. And any level of any desired nutrient for osteoporosis prevention can be obtained from plants. Even if you're trying to get 1,200 a day, you can do it with plants. You have to work harder. So calcium, magnesium, vitamin K. Oh, just a couple more minutes. Here's another one of our heroes. Let's see. He is a member of, I'm starting to get annoyed by that. I'm going to change that. It's starting to even bother me. But it does keep you awake, right? So he's a member of the Vegetarian Hall of Fame, along with Mahatma Gandhi and Howard Lyman and a lot of other important people. He wrote, as I said, The Most Noble Diet. The Most Noble Diet actually has to do with eating food that doesn't harm other people on the planet. And it has to do with a lot of the foods that get imported to this country, like bananas and coffee. They're not necessarily so great for the people who, where they're grown. And I don't really have time to go into that now, but we'll talk about it later. And then he also has a course in vegetarian and vegan nutrition, which you could take. He has a recent book called Don't Let Your Diet Add to Your Cancer Risk. And he's a co-founder of the Vegetarian Nutrition Practice Group of the American Dietetic Association, which is now called the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, right? One more article that I want to tell you about. Why does calcium cause prostate cancer? Or why is it associated with increased risk of prostate cancer? I didn't really understand this until recently, at least the theory. So if you take in a lot of calcium, it actually changes your vitamin D profile in your body. Because if you have a lot of, vitamin D helps you absorb calcium from your gut. So if you need calcium, your vitamin D level goes up. And there's sort of several points along the chemical pathway. So your body makes a kind of vitamin D in your skin when you get exposed to sun. That goes into your blood. That then goes to your liver and gets turned into this 25. See, that's 125 hydroxy vitamin D. So look for the number, the 1 and the 25 and the OH. That's the active form of vitamin D. That's the part that's floating around your blood, not very long. I think it lasted just maybe 6 hours, something like that. That's the stuff that really is active on your bone and on your gut, absorbing from gut. What they measure, the vitamin D level they measure is actually 25 without the 1 in front of it. So between, after it's gone through the liver but before it gets to your kidney, that's when you measure vitamin D levels. That's what you measure. It turns out that the active form of vitamin D after it's gone through your kidney, that one, that is protective of the prostate. Why? I don't know, but it is. Just say it. And when you take in a lot of vitamin D, your body stops making that form. You're taking a lot of calcium. Your body says, oh, I don't need so much calcium to absorb from my gut. I'm going to stop making that form of the vitamin D. And then that reduces the protective effect on your prostate. So it's pretty complicated. Vitamin D does a lot of things besides calcium metabolism. Anyway, again, this is prostate risk. This is an article also from American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. These results support the hypothesis that dairy products and calcium are associated with a greater risk of prostate cancer, possibly because of that mechanism that I showed you. Again, conclusion, these results, this is again from Harvard, do not support a relationship between calcium intake and the incidence of forearm or hip fractures in men. This is calcium, vitamin D, milk consumption, again. An adequate vitamin D intake is associated with a lower risk of osteoporotic hip fractures in postmenopausal women. Neither milk nor a high calcium diet appears to reduce risk. And now it's time for Carol.
Today we're doing the tasting a little differently. Good evening, by the way. I'm going to ask you to serve yourselves. So I'm just saying, pretend you're at a cocktail party, you know, but without the wine. We'll do that later in the class, maybe. But anyway, tonight I made a variety of and provided a variety of cheeses. None have soy in them, no wheat, except for the crackers, and I have a non-wheat cracker alternative. But I did want to say that for those who can't have or don't want to have nuts, there are a couple of them that I made that have nuts. I made a cashew cream cheese, which obviously has nuts in it, and I made, it's called a 4-ingredient dip, cheese dip, that has a little cashew in it. So they're clearly labeled, and I just ask you to stay away from them if you can't have nuts. But basically with the items that I made, I started with white beans, and I added different things. So you can kind of see, well, what additives, what flavors added did you like? So there's 3 different white bean options for you to try. I also gave you 3 varieties of this new commercial cheese called Daiya. It's spelled D-A-I-Y-A. And it was considered quite a breakthrough. It's actually a little bit better if it's served warm because it melts and stretches. It's kind of...
It's great on pizza, actually.
Yeah, it's great on
like
pizza.
You can get pizza with...
Or grilled cheese sandwiches. I mean, it's that kind of, has that kind of texture. It's not like a crumbly aged cheddar kind of texture. But there's 3 types over there, and see what you think of that. I have wheat crackers.
It's not a health food, though.
It's not a health food. It's actually
by any means.
It's actually got pea protein, tapioca, and oil, and so it's not oil-free. However, my cheeses that I made are all oil-free, except for what's inherent in the nuts. I gave you low-salt Triscuits, but also for those who can't have wheat, Mary's Gone crackers, which are basically a whole food. They're made from seeds and rice, and everyone should try them because they're really wonderful. We love them. We eat them all the time. And I kept them, by the way, I was scrupulous about keeping the wheat and the nut ingredients separate from everything, and you'll see the crackers are segregated too. Now, the last thing is that the cashew cream cheese that I made, well, I'll be interested in hearing what you think of all of these, but the cashew cream cheese is a little different from the others. You know, some of these recipes have been around for a while, and the basic idea is let's start with something and throw in a bunch of ingredients and see if it tastes like cheese. Well, recently there is this woman, and she's written other cookbooks, but she has, this is pretty new. It's called Artisan Vegan Cheese, and her insight was that cheese making is not what you add to it, it's what you do to it. So you start with an ingredient, and basically you ferment it and sometimes age it. So what I made for you today is very briefly fermented. But see, the challenge is she wrote this cookbook, but when you make any kind of cheese, including vegan cheese, sometimes it takes 6 weeks to get the desired result. So when people make a recipe, they don't want to have to wait 6 weeks to eat it. So she kind of finessed that in various ways. But this particular one is really, it's almost a fresh but just slightly fermented cheese. So I will let you get up and see what you think. The stations, there's only one Daiya cheese station in the middle, and then there's 2 stations for the homemade cheeses. So I'll let you try everything.
Carol. That's why I'm so fat. She feeds me all the time. So who lived through the 60s here? Oh, yeah, almost all of you. Right? So who's the guy in the middle? George McGovern. Who's to his left? Bob Dole. So we actually have time. This is actually a video that Michael Greger put together. It's a 6.5-minute video, and I think it's worth showing because it talks about a history of dietary recommendations back in the 70s. So I'm going to run this.
George McGovern, who died last year, age 90, was best known for his 1972 presidential defeat to Richard Nixon. But he also chaired a committee that released the first dietary guidelines in the United States in January 1977. The simple fact is, quoting from the press conference, that our diets have changed radically within the last 50 years with great and often very harmful effects on our health. These dietary changes represent as great a threat to public health as smoking. The diet of the American people has become increasingly rich in meat and other sources of saturated fat and cholesterol, and in sugar. Most all the health problems underlying the leading causes of death in the United States could be modified by improvements in diet. Ischemic heart disease, cancer, diabetes, hypertension are diseases that kill us. They're epidemic in our population. We cannot afford to temporize. The public wants some guidance, wants to know the truth, and hopefully today we can lay the cornerstone for the building of better health for all Americans through better nutrition. As Dr. Hegstead later recounted in an interview, a founding member of Harvard's nutrition department that spoke at the press conference, the meat, milk, and egg producers were very upset, and they weren't the only ones. The president and chair of the International Sugar Research Foundation called the report unfortunate and ill-advised, all part of the emotional anti-table sugar tidal wave conspiracy, evidently. From the official record of the committee hearings, simply stated, people like sweet things, and apparently the McGovern Committee believes that people should be deprived of what they like. There is a puritanical streak in certain Americans that leads them to become do-gooders. The president of the Salt Institute felt that there's definitely no need for a dietary goal that calls for the reduction of salt consumption. In fact, the assertion from the report that improved nutrition may cut our nation's health bill by a third was challenged. See, what the committee didn't understand is that healthcare expenditures increase if the lifespan is prolonged. See, if people live longer because they eat healthier, it could be more expensive. As some researcher pointed out, if tobacco were banned, the increase in the expected lifespan would simultaneously increase the cost of care of old people, which comes under the category of healthcare expenditures. If people eat healthier, the Salt Institute warned, we might have more old people to take care of. The National Dairy Council likewise recommended the dietary goals be withdrawn and reformulated to have the endorsement of the food industry. You know, as soon as Haagen-Dazs says they're OK, then go for it. The two industries that went most ballistic, though, were the meat and egg producers, who demanded additional hearings were held. Egg councils requested the distribution of the dietary goals be immediately stopped. The frightening development, as far as the egg industry was concerned, is that the advocates of a modified low-cholesterol diet now have the credibility and prestige of the U.S. Senate. The president of the American National Cattlemen's Association described why the meat industry reacted rather violently, complaining that meat is never mentioned in a positive way in the guidelines. The only mention of meat are those associating meat consumption with various degenerative diseases. If these dietary goals are moved forward and promoted in the present form, entire sectors of the food industry, meat, dairy, egg, sugar, and others, may be so severely damaged that when it is realized that the dietary goals are ill-advised, as surely they will be, production recovery may be out of reach. Thus, guided by my conscience, as the president of the National Livestock and Meat Board, I am certain that actions of the animal industries to ensure Americans are properly fed with abundant meat and other animal foods is an honorable and morally correct diet course. The meat industry recommended the committee withdraw the dietary guidelines and issue a corrected report. They especially didn't like guideline number 2, to decrease meat consumption to lower saturated fat intake. Senator Dole, Kansas Senator Dole, offered to have that amended from decrease meat consumption to instead increase consumption of lean meat. Would that taste better to you? He asked the president of the Cattlemen's Association, who replied, "Decrease is a bad word, Senator." So what happened? By the end of the year, a revised version of the dietary goals was released. Indeed, the guidelines was changed from decrease meat consumption to choose meat, poultry, and fish, which will reduce saturated fat intake. That wasn't enough for the meat industry, though. They wanted the whole Committee on Nutrition eliminated completely and its functions turned over to the Agriculture Committee. The New York Times, noting that the Agriculture Committee looks after the producers of food, not the consumer, editorialized that folding the Nutrition Committee into the Agriculture Committee would be like sending the chickens off to live with the foxes. And that's what happened. The Senate Committee on Nutrition and Human Needs got disbanded and placed within the Senate Committee on Agriculture. George McGovern fought until the bitter end, though, when an interviewer confronted him with the serenity prayers, "Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change," McGovern rejected the notion, saying, "I keep trying to change them."
I just thought that was really effective, so that's why I wanted to run that. It's been going on for a long time, as you can see, and it's not getting any better. You just really can't really accept any dietary information from any organizations that are going to be so easily lobbied. Oh, this is Carol, where are you? We're talking about your recipe. I think we might skip that.
My regular pesto recipe is, I believe, on the recipe sheet for this time, but one other time I made a no-oil version because, well, I wanted to see if it could be done, and that's it. So if you want to try it that way, it was pretty good.
It was.
You can see it on the YouTube version. It's not printed off, but there it is. So
We could print. We can. We can actually put the recipe online. We'll put it with our course. If anybody's interested, we can put it. I can include it on like the next when you go to the website. Because otherwise you have to watch the whole video. And who wants to do that?
Can you remind me what miso is? Miso soup.
Explain miso.
it's a fermented soybean paste. It's very salty, but there are a lot of beneficial health claims made for it. And you can use it. It has a slightly cheesy taste, so it's nice as an ingredient.
And it's got the umami flavor, right?
It's very savory.
Right. You know about umami flavor? Explain umami.
Why are you putting me on the spot?
I'm tired of talking. I had a headache today.
Umami is savory, I think.
Yeah, that's right.
Savory.
Yeah. It's like the fourth flavor. Before I forget, if you don't realize, all these handouts we're giving you are available on the RAV's website, the Rochester Area Vegetarian Society. You go to our website and you click on course resources, which depending on your browser is occasionally hidden because we have a flaw. But if you like reload your browser or just move your cursor around, it shows up. It's called course resources. You click on that, you'll end up at another page that has things you can click so you can get all the handouts for each of the different classes. And also, as I get the videos posted, they're there as well. And you can just click on that. It'll take you right to the YouTube link. So this video will be up probably by next Monday. The other last two classes are on there. So let's just go over our recommendations. You know about that, the no animal products. We are still recommending low fat, although as I've said, we're trying to wrap our minds around that. But instead of just thinking about low fat, think about just eating whole foods. And whatever fat happens to come along with that, as long as it's not exclusively nuts and avocados, you're probably going to do okay. And one of the keys is avoid replacing fats with fast carbs. So fast carbs are refined flour, sugar, things that are really easily digested. And one of the things after the Ornish program back in the in the 90s, people kind of followed the letter of the law and not the spirit of the law. So the letter of the law is no fat, right? So you'd eat sugar cookies and pretzels and stuff, and you're not getting any fat, but you're also eating a lot of junk, these refined carbohydrates, which turn out to raise your triglycerides, which is also bad for heart disease. So you got to watch out for that. Lots of green leafy vegetables, raw and cooked. Most people need to be eating more raw, but it's not really that important. The key is just lots. And instead of this being a little portion on the side of your plate, like this goes along with my steak, right? So huge amounts of greens, vegetables, and a little bit of like tofu or some beans or something. So it's kind of the other way around. So these are, you can name them all now, kale, collards. Those are all cole crops, right? They're in the cabbage family. And then there's beet greens and chard. They're in a slightly different group. Beet, yes?
What about juicing
what about juicing to consume more? Who was there Sunday night and saw Jean-Pierre? Okay, so he's a big fan of smoothies, but not juicing. So juicing, basically, you're kind of removing the fiber. Not a good idea. And here's why. It basically becomes almost a refined carbohydrate at that point, and now you're getting a big bolus of sugar, right? So that can not be so great for somebody with diabetes. It's just also can raise your triglycerides. It's kind of easy carbs.
Even though it's mostly green stuff and not fruits?
Even though it's mostly green, yeah. Well, I don't think it's, do I think it's evil? Not really. But like I stopped drinking orange juice, which really was horrible for me for a while. Now orange juice tastes funny to me. And I eat oranges. Oranges are great. They've got all the fiber. They've got all these other, solids that go with it. And I think oranges taste great. Now to me, orange juice tastes processed most of the time, unless it's really good Florida orange juice. Right? Okay. Broccoli is more of a solid green vegetable, but it's great food. I'll sit down and, if Carol's like away, I buy like a couple of pounds of broccoli and a few sweet potatoes, and that's what I eat. And it's just great. And what do I put on it? Not much. Maybe some lemon juice or some garlic powder. So, yeah. Beet greens, chard, spinach are a little sometimes problematic because they contain, Carol, you're not here, oxalic acid, oxalates, which can interfere with absorption of iron. So, but it turns out not to be a really huge concern. So anytime you're getting greens in your body, it's always a good thing. So although Caldwell-Esselstyn would say, stay away from nuts, right? No oils at all. We think that modest nut intake is good if you don't have heart disease. And how much is modest? Not a huge amount, a handful. 1 to 1.5 ounces a day. And any of the nuts are good. Walnuts are especially popular because they have a fair amount of omega-3s. Make sure they're not prepared with added oils. Unfortunately, most of the snack machines that have the bags of peanuts, the Planters peanuts are prepared in cottonseed oil. I don't know why they do that. It's really annoying. Because around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I walk by those machines, I see those bags of peanuts. I really want them. So eat whole foods as much as possible. Minimal processing. Again, little or no added salt or oil. It's amazing how your tastes can change. So when we buy corn during the summer, when I was a kid, corn wasn't corn unless you slathered it with butter and salt and pepper, right? To me, fresh corn now with nothing on it is amazing. That's just the way I like it. So you can change your perceptions, change your taste buds. Anything that comes in a package you want to avoid unless it's one of those pre-washed greens. Those are good. Stay away from the center of the supermarket. Why? Because that's where all the bags of chips and sodas are, where most people get their calories. So what about supplements? We're going to keep reviewing this because I don't want you to forget. So B12 is important. You should be getting at least 2,500 micrograms a week. As long as you're getting some form of B12 on a regular basis, it almost doesn't matter how you do it. So these are the 3 different ways you can do it. We really don't recommend the daily multivitamin, but if you're taking one anyway, you're going to get enough B12. And you only need 2.4 micrograms per day actually absorbed, but absorption isn't so great once you get beyond that 2.4. So that's why you need to take a lot to kind of soak your system with it. Don't worry about getting too much. Vitamin D, a couple of thousand units per day throughout the year, or 15 to 30 minutes midday sun in the summer, because you need to get a fair amount. And how much skin do you have to have exposed? I'm not exactly sure. So we'll have to check on that. A lot? Yeah. Okay. So, I think it's probably a safer, especially people who are concerned about osteoporosis, to be just taking the vitamin D and get over it. Plus your dermatologist will not be so hard on you.
The question.
Yeah.
Institute of Medicine recommends, I think, 600.
Right.
So
why so high?
Yeah.
So the Institute of Medicine only recommends 600 international units of vitamin D, right around the 600, 800. Yeah, that's true, right? Where is it? 400 to 800, I think, something like that.
It used to be 400.
Yeah, okay. And, a lot of that has to do with preventing deficiency diseases. And vitamin D does a lot of other things beside preventing rickets and osteomalacia. So it's not really known. not clear that you can overdose on vitamin D. So for now, anyway, we're recommending these higher doses because that's what Michael Greger says. So, you know, obviously we're nervous about recommending any supplements. We really don't like to recommend any because we think you can do this pretty well from whole foods, but you just can't get vitamin D out of whole foods. Yes?
D2, there's D3.
So there's D2 and D3. They're both good. You can take either one. And there's a lot of discussion about which one's better. They're both fine. And we could talk about that at a later time. The omega-3 fatty acids, what I think is just the ground flax, 1 or 2 tablespoons a day. That's what I have on my cereal every morning. That's a whole food, right? It's like eating ground nuts. It's actually quite a bit of calories. I forget what it comes to, but it's like I think 80 calories just from a couple tablespoons. But you mix that in your oatmeal or put it on your cereal or whatever it is you have for breakfast or in your smoothie if you're having green smoothies. So, as far as these DHA EPA supplements, again, those fit into the category of fish oil, and it's not clear that that's really good for you. And it's definitely a fractionated food. It's definitely a supplement. You know, it's fractionated. We don't really know the answer to that. I think if you're getting plenty of greens and you're not eating a lot of omega-6s, which are what you tend to find in processed foods, then you don't need to worry so much about omega-3s. Question? Flax oil. I mentioned it the first time, and I'll mention it again. Flax oil is bad. Just stay away from flax oil. Why should you stay away from flax oil? It's a fractionated food. Well, the first clue is it comes in a dark bottle, and you're supposed to stick it in the refrigerator, right? You know why? Because it's very unstable. It breaks down and gives off all these free radicals. Have you ever smelled? Have you ever used it? What's it taste like? It's disgusting, right? It's the same thing as linseed oil. It's paint. Maybe if it's really fresh. Maybe if it's really fresh, it's okay. But basically, it goes rancid really fast. It's breaking down. As soon as you take it out of the nut, out of its protective coat, now it's being exposed to oxygen in the air, and it's forming free radicals. And yes?
So with the flax seed, so I got a little grinder.
Yeah, and it's cheap, right? Flaxseed is incredibly cheap, right?
Right. And I know you're supposed, how long can it keep in the refrigerator ground?
The question is, how long can you keep flaxseed in the refrigerator ground? We keep it for a couple of weeks without worrying about it. Yeah. I mean, obviously, the quicker you use it, the better. If you stick it in a glass bottle and stick it in the fridge or the freezer, I think it lasts a long time. You can kind of tell. It does start to smell like paint if it gets bad. Sometimes you'll buy flaxseed that's not even ground, and you can tell they're rancid. They give off that funny smell. So, yes?
Perhaps not everyone's stomach is like mine, but I'll warn
Yeah.
that to build up slowly.
Yes, you should. That's correct. Yeah, that's true. I have heard that. Yeah. 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 The question is, can you buy ground flax? Yes, you can buy ground flax. And is it okay? It's still better to grind it yourself. It's very quick. You get a little coffee grinder. We have one. It's kind of a ritual every week or so. You just pour it into the grinder. You hold the button down. Make sure you grind it a long time until it really turns to a fine powder, because you really can't digest it when it's still inside the casing. Yep.
Quick question.
Sure.
I noticed you don't say anything about John McDougall. Do you follow him?
John McDougall's great.
So I know for his vitamin D, he doesn't recommend taking any supplements. I mean,
John McDougall does not recommend vitamin D?
for vitamin D.
Okay.
He says the sun, but he lives in California.
He lives in California, right. So she's talking about John McDougall, who is one of our heroes. He's one of our vegan heroes. I don't mention him, because I can't mention everybody. But plus he's also really famous, so he doesn't need to be mentioned. I mean, he's got so many bestsellers, right, on the New York, I mean, it's like a dozen.
Right. But I just
Yeah.
noticed vitamin D, he does not recommend.
So John McDougall does not recommend vitamin D, so that tells you something. Tells you that he lives in a sunny state. He lives in California, yeah. So, and we have plenty of time to talk about these tomorrow when we're done here. I'll come back. So that's the recommendation. But really just eat whole foods, right? And then go outside and run around, get a little sun, get some exercise. These are the wrong questions. I showed you these before. I'm going to show you again. Where do I get my protein? You get it from green leafies. You get it from vegetables. He's an elephant. He's a vegan. And where does she get her calcium? She gets it from green leafies so much that she can put it in her milk, and we sell it to people for calcium, right? So let's talk about snacks. This is one of my favorite topics. So basically what are snacks? They're things that are munchable, right? Things you sit around snacking. And I snack a lot. I don't necessarily think it's the only way to do it, but that's just me. So let's compare different kinds of snacks. So potato chips versus carrots. How many How many calories per pound of potato chips? All right, 2,500 calories per pound. How many calories in it? How many calories are you supposed to eat in a day? About 2,000, 2,500, 3,000 maybe. So you sit down and have a pound of potato chips. That's all your calories for the day right there. And that could happen, right? Probably with dip, with sour cream dip, right? What about carrots? And 60% of those calories are from fat. What about carrots? How many calories in a pound of carrots? Anybody know? 100? How much? 60? It's about 190. So about 200 calories in a pound. Now, you can't eat too many carrots. You can eat way too many potato chips, but you can't eat too many carrots. I guarantee it. If you sit down and you want to munch on something, munch on carrots. You could turn orange. I know if people have done it. That's pretty cool. What's the percent calories from fat in a carrot? You think? It's a living thing with cells, right? You don't think there's any fat? It's actually 5% calories from fat. It has to be. It has cell walls. You could probably squeeze carrot oil out of it and sell it. What about pretzels and celery? So how many calories do you think are in a pound of pretzels? 1,700. Okay, so still a lot. And you can eat a lot of pretzels, right? And you get a lot of salt at the same time. That's great with beer, right? Oh, I can give you the answer. It's 4% calories from fat. And what we just review carrots. What are carrots? How many calories per pound? Right, so about 200, right? Yeah. And percent calories from fat? 5. Yes?
What about dipping them in hummus?
What about dipping them in hummus? Okay, so there's a good question because that's a typical thing to do. I know I do it. So hummus is, if you buy it in the store, is really high in fat. It's got a lot of added oil. It's basically a fractionated food. You can make hummus that's not like that. Esselstyn has it in his recipes in his book for making hummus that's Esselstyn friendly with no added oil. He doesn't even add tahini, which Carol would do. Yeah. So what about celery? How many calories per pound of celery? 120? I can't remember. I got to see here. 75. You can sit there and eat all the celery you want. Now, if you start dipping the celery into the hummus, or when I was a kid, it was cream cheese on the celery. And peanut butter, whatever, right? What's the percent calories from fat in celery? 4%, 3%, 9.5%. Right? Why? Because it doesn't have a lot of calories, but it has a lot of cell walls. So it's 10% calories from fat. We should sell celery oil. What about beer? How many calories in a can of beer? It depends. Yeah. Okay.
Between 65 and 180.
Name a brand. He can probably tell you how many, right? And how many what's the percent calories from fat in beer?
0.
Finally, we got 0. Yeah, 0. All right. So here's another really good snack. What about popcorn? So hot air or plain microwave popcorn. How many calories in 4 cups? 80. It's actually 125 calories for 4 cups. And what percent calories from fat in popcorn? It's 10%. So it's kind of like any other vegetable, right? 5 to 10%. What about if you get microwave popcorn in a... What's that?
Is there some fat in even plain microwave?
Well, the way we microwave it. I'll talk...
The bag, that's a little misleading.
Oh, that's misleading. Yeah, we're talking about this one down here. That's the 10% calories from fat. Now, what about microwave popcorn in a bag? Okay. Yeah. I should switch the pictures. You're right. Point well taken. Okay. So it's oil popped microwave regular flavor. See, I get these from this USDA website. So if you want to look it up and check me, that's why I put down all the words. How many calories in 4 cups of that stuff? Death in a bag, right? It's 260 calories for 4 cups. And what's the percent calories from fat in a bag of popcorn? Percent calories from fat? It's 2/3 for that particular brand. I don't know. Maybe there's some low-fat brands. I don't know of them. What about if you go to the movie theater and get one of those buckets? How many calories? How many calories in a large? How many calories in a large popcorn bucket? Which is what? How much? 50? It was like $15, right? Costs more than the movie. So it's almost 1,000 calories. And what's the percent calories from fat? It's actually not as high. It's only 42% calories from fat, that particular one.
Is that with or without the oil?
With or without the, it's without, no, I think it's, I don't know, I mean added butter? Oh, I don't know. I got this from the USDA website. I'm not really sure. So don't eat that stuff. This is what you want down here, and I'm going to show you how you get that. You don't want that. You want that. Don't burn it. Okay. So this is my recipe for popcorn. So you get one of these plastic containers. I know it's got plastic, so maybe there's a way around that. I'm not sure. But there's special microwave containers for making popcorn. You put a little bit in the bottom. It's 1/3 of a cup of kernels in this special microwave container. And you cook in the microwave for 2.5 minutes, and it just fills up with popcorn. And then you shake it with garlic powder, dill weed, and nutritional yeast. And maybe you spray with a little soy sauce or Bragg's aminos. And now you've got the thing that's only 10% calories from fat, and it's delicious. And it's not greasy. It doesn't leave you feeling really lousy.
Just regular popcorn?
You just buy plain popcorn. Oh, and it's so incredibly cheap, right? Because those microwave bags are pretty expensive. This is nothing. It's like a few cents.
Is that on high?
And then you go back to watching a movie. What's that?
Is that on high?
It's on high. Yeah, it's just a regular setting on the microwave. You have to experiment with your own microwave. And if you get one of those, it comes with instructions. Spray a meat. Oh.
Meals actually comes in a little, you can get it in a little spray bottle and then refill it from the laundry. Or you can use any spray bottle.
So the question is, how do you spray Bragg's aminos? Yeah, you can get this little spray bottle, and you can just keep refilling it. And it's psh, psh, and you know, that's where you get the salt, basically. So this is a different one that you can get on Amazon. So you know, you should experiment and whoops, come, you know, let us know. See what you find out. We can experiment. So just really quickly, since we talk about protein a lot, this is just a quick review, and I think I'm gonna quit this. I'm gonna skip this. It's kind of late. We won't have time for questions. Yeah.
I just wanted to say, when you're talking about vitamin D,
Yeah, you can just read that one, Carol.
that's about D2 and D3. D2 is the vegan version.
D2 is the vegan, right?
But it's harder to find. Actually, now there are some vegan source D3, but they're still hard to find. They tend to be like in Lori's and health food stores. So, you know, it's kind of a minor point, but if you do want to be completely vegan, D2 is vegan, and then
Right.
only if it says that it's vegan, D3,
Mm-hmm.
which can be found now.
Right. So how much protein do you need? Well, the Institute of Medicine says you need 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram per day. So we're going to do all this math, and then what's the answer going to be at the end? Eat a whole food plant-based diet, right? That's the answer at the end. But let's go through it. So if you weigh 70 kilograms, you're a 70 kilogram man, you would need 56 grams of protein. If you take in 2,400 calories per day, 56 grams of protein provides 9% of your calories. Because how many calories in a gram of protein? 4, right? Oh, and it comes to 9% of your calories, so that's not a whole lot. And people are getting 15, 20%. Americans maybe 25, 30%. So you only need 9%. And there's just no problem with getting that from plants. Protein combining. Frances Moore Lepay, people remember the book she wrote? Diet for a Small Planet. Diet for a New Planet. And she's the one who talked about protein combining. And because you look around the world and people have grains and legumes. So that's where people started to think, well, I can do this vegan thing, but I got to be really careful to combine everything all the time. Well, it turns out you don't need to really worry about that. As long as you're eating a varied diet, you're going to get all the different amino acids you need. And then she agrees with that, and she got another book out of it by saying you don't have to worry about that. So that's a secret to being a successful author, is to write a book that gets everyone thinking one way, and then change your mind and get everyone to buy your other book. So we're getting toward the end here. We're just going to play this game. So baked potato, what's the percent calories from protein in a baked potato? Just yell it, just guess. Okay, the answer is 9%, so not a lot of protein. And from fat, 14%. French fries. Protein as a percent of calories. Obviously, it's going to go down, right? Because now it's mostly, you've added all this oil. And the percent calories from fat is going to be really high. So if you have heart disease and you're trying to get your 10%, live on 10% calories from fat, you're not going to do it by eating French fries. What about potato chips? Same idea, right? 5%, 60% fat. What about pasta? Pasta's pretty healthy, right? So that's pretty high, 16% calories from protein.
Are they whole grain pasta?
That's actually regular white pasta. Yeah.
So does whole grain have more protein?
It would be probably about the same. It might be a little lower, actually, because you're getting some calories from fat in the germ. But the thing is, I'm showing you this, and then you're supposed to remember that, oh yeah, I don't have to worry about this, right? Because I'm eating whole foods, I'm going to get all my protein. But until you get over that, it could take you a year to get over this. It's really hard to get over the whole protein thing. But because I remember the first thing I did when I was on my own is just read how much protein am I getting, because my mother's not here. I got to make sure I'm getting enough protein, right?
Ted, do you
Yeah.
eat pasta?
Do we eat pasta? Yeah, we do. Yeah, we try to eat whole grain pasta. Oh yeah, so then the rest is obviously fat. This is an egg. What about broccoli? Percent calories from protein in broccoli. I showed you this once before. Do you remember? Yell out a number. 10, 20, 44%. Right? If you were getting all your calories from broccoli, you would probably you could get protein toxic. Probably not, because it's a whole plant food, right? How much fat? There's a little fat, 4%. What about kidney beans? Because we think of beans as being where you get the protein, right? That's going to be a little lower. It's pretty good though, 27%. And 4% fat. So beans tend to have some fat, although not that one. Soybeans have quite a bit of fat. In fact, they make soybean oil. What about kale? Calories from protein? 50%? Not quite that high. But it's good. I mean, it's the same as the beans, right? It's got more fat than the beans, though. Apple with skin is low, 2%. So if you wanted to design a diet to become deficient in protein and you were living on whole foods, you could do it on some fruits, right? Apples, you could do it with apples. But it's really hard to be protein deficient if you're eating just a varied diet. You just really can't do it. And you obviously couldn't live on apples. What about strawberries? Another fruit. I'm running out of time. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'll go through this fast. But people love this, right? It's a guessing game. So strawberries have fat and protein. Bananas are pretty low. Carrots, remember them? 9%, 5%. Walnuts, they're going to be kind of high, right? So, but not so high in protein. They're high in fat. 90% calories from fat. Tofu. Tofu's pretty high in both. It doesn't really have a lot of carbohydrate. Soy milk. And soy milk tends to be kind of processed, so raspberries, another fruit. But most of the fruits, aside from apples, you can actually get enough protein, right? Blueberries are kind of low. Brown rice. So brown rice is considered one of those really ideal foods, right? And it's only 9% calories from protein. Green beans, it's going to be higher because it's green. It's a green solid. The green solid vegetables tend to have a lot of protein. So, who said this? Nothing of any real positive social value has ever been achieved from the top down. It's always been achieved from the bottom up. And that's what we are. We're grassroots. Who said that? Margaret Mead. Close. She said something like it, right? There's something about small groups or whatever. Actually, Howard Zinn, the guy who, People's History of America, who's also related to John Kabat-Zinn, the mindfulness guy. Yeah. So, thank you all for coming.